On New Year's Day, I accidentally unlocked a superpower. All I had to do was stare intently at a handsome photo of the guy next door, and poof, that 6'2" Prince of Chill would materialize right in front of me. So there James stood, facing a room full of my relatives with nothing on but his boxers, his face darkening as he said, "Have you figured out how to explain this?" Here's how it all went down. It was New Year's Day, and our house was packed with relatives. The kids were loud, and I sought refuge in my room, flipping through my phone to admire today's stolen shot of our neighbor. That high-nose bridge, those narrow almond eyes, those broad shoulders, that perfect butt, and that tantalizing glimpse of collarbone from his slightly unbuttoned shirt. I was practically swooning. No wonder my mom always says I used to cling to him as a kid, sneaking into his arms for kisses. But once I hit high school, whether it was the start of a crush or something else, I barely dared to go near him. Just seeing him made me want to run away, avoiding any chance of conversation. So by the time I went to college, we'd basically lost touch. God. If I had another chance, I'd chase him down for sure. At the very least, I'd steal his first kiss. As this thought crossed my mind, fireworks burst across the sky outside my window, painting it in radiant colors. And suddenly, a man was standing in my room. Well, so James really was that ripped? With abs, too. His chest muscles looked delicious. Wait, where were his pants? James met my startled eyes with a mix of shock and confusion, and I sprang out of bed. "What's going on?" he demanded, his voice low and steady. I wanted to ask the same thing. Confirming that he hadn't come in from the living room and definitely hadn't climbed through my window, I mumbled, "Could it be that my fairy godmother granted my wish?" "What wish?" James asked, instantly picking up on that detail. Lowering my head, blushing, I muttered, "I wished for you." James stared at me, completely baffled. "No, I mean, I wished to be with you." James frowned. "That's your wish?" I nodded earnestly. He was silent for a moment, as if trying hard to process this surreal turn of events. Then he gave me a once-over, skeptical. "Why would you want to be with me?" Awkwardly, I stammered, "Because you're handsome." The look in James' eyes turned into one of disdain. I regretted it immediately. That just slipped out too fast. I should have said it was because he was talented. Then came a knock on my door, followed by my mom's yell. "Your aunts and uncle are all out here waiting to see you. Get out here already." I tensed. "I just need to get dressed." "I'll be right out," she added, "and fix your hair. Don't go out there all messy." "Right." I hastily straightened myself out, tugging my pants up a bit. James' face went stiff, and he gave a cold laugh. "What if they come in here? Have you thought about how to explain this?" Frantically rummaging through my drawers, I pulled out a tracksuit and, with some reluctance, handed it to him. "Maybe you could wear something to cover up." While he was trying it on, I took the chance to sneak a few more glances. What a perfectly sculpted body. Who knew when I'd get another chance to see it up close? James tossed the top aside, but he did manage to squeeze into the pants. Even if they ended up looking like cropped trousers on him, I felt a bit crestfallen. Was my waist really the same size as his? Somehow, he even made the pants look baggy. James frowned. "The shirt doesn't fit, the shoulders are too tight. And these pants?" He shot me an even deeper frown. "They're pink." "I'm a girl," I reasoned, trying to negotiate. "How about I sneak into my dad's room and grab you something?" He exhaled, looking like he'd really love to take those pants off. "Guess that'll have to do." I told him to stay quiet in my room and, if need be, hide in the closet. Then, putting on my best poker face, I strolled out as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. As soon as I opened the door, I was bombarded by a cacophony of greetings and questions from my relatives. I did my best to keep smiling, greeting each aunt and uncle one by one under my mom's watchful guidance. By the time I'd managed to sneak into my dad's room and snag a set of clothes for James, 20 minutes had passed. I also grabbed him a bag of chocolates on the way back. Dressed in my dad's middle-aged style, a brown sweater and trousers, James still managed to look handsome. Guess having a face like his could pull off anything. Unwrapping a piece of chocolate, I held it up to his mouth, with a grin. James leaned down to take it, but then, as if realizing how intimate the gesture looked, he jerked his head away slightly. I couldn't help but laugh. I checked my relatives should be leaving soon. Once my parents go to sleep, you can sneak back home, and no one will ever know. He nodded, his expression finally softening a bit. So, while we wait, let's chat, I suggested. About what? Do you have a girlfriend? James ignored my question, casually taking a seat at my computer, clearly uninterested in entertaining me. Come on, answer me. What's your computer password? He asked instead. Classic. While James watched a movie, I just watched him, occasionally slipping him slices of apple I'd peeled. Aren't you going to eat some? He asked. I shook my head. You're sweeter than the apple. After that, he went quiet. An hour later, having finished off the entire plate of apple slices, James frowned and glanced at me. Are your relatives gone yet? I need to use the bathroom. Hold on. I cracked the door open and peeked outside, then turned back with an apologetic look. A few left, but there are still some chatting in the living room. Picking up an empty soda bottle on my desk, I said, maybe, you could, make do with this? I swear I won't look. James gave me a withering look, his expression so dark I didn't dare meet his gaze. You seriously expect me to use this? He asked, eyeing the bottle. I considered it. Is the bottle opening too small? The moment the words left my mouth, I felt embarrassed and quickly set the bottle down. James' eyes darkened. And he let out a dry chuckle. Maybe I should just go out there and say hi to your family. But how would you explain sneaking into my room in the middle of the night? I tried to dissuade him. Besides, with so many relatives outside, they'd definitely start guessing things. And what would be the problem? We could just say we're dating, he said casually. My eyes lit up. Really? Sure, James said blandly. Then, when anyone asks later, just say we broke up. Oh, wow. He could make up these little lies without batting an eye? But if my parents and your parents find out you're here so late, they'll definitely hold you responsible for me, I sighed in mock resignation. James narrowed his eyes. Responsible in what way? There's no way they'd believe we were just watching a movie. I pointed to the computer screen, showing it was past midnight. Especially with your dad being such a strict, serious guy, he'd never buy it. Before I could finish, James snatched the soda bottle from my hand, gritting his teeth. Turn around. I obediently turned my back to him. And cover your ears. Got it. And don't talk. Should I get a bottle with a bigger mouth? Just, be quiet. When I finally turned around, James had stashed the bottle out of sight. Something told me he wouldn't be drinking soda again for a long time. I felt both amused and a bit worried. After something this embarrassing, could he ever really fall for me? James continued playing games on my computer while I lay on the bed, quietly admiring his profile. The faint sounds of my family's conversation outside slowly lulled me to sleep. It's getting late. Who knows when they'll finally head out, I murmured, yawning as I patted the empty space beside me. Do you want to come lie down for a bit? James smirked. If we share a bed, I might end up doing something bad. Blushing, I replied, then should I turn off the light? James's smile faded, and he looked away, appearing a bit frustrated. I almost burst out laughing. Somehow, I drifted off, only to wake up later and see James still sitting at the computer, in the exact same position. What was he looking at so intently? A sudden worry struck me, and I crawled out of bed to check his screen. Relieved, I saw he was just watching the movie. I've seen this one too, I said, trying to make small talk. James glanced at me, seemingly at a loss for words. There was something off in his expression. Wait, had he been looking through my bookmarks? Thankfully, he just asked calmly, awake now? Feeling a bit self-conscious, I nodded. Your mom came by earlier and asked if you wanted spaghetti, he added. I stared at him in surprise. What did you say? He gave me a flat look. What was I supposed to say? I didn't say anything. She didn't open the door, did she? No. Good. She probably thought I was asleep. James shut down the computer, rubbing his forehead in apparent exhaustion. It sounds quiet outside now. Check if they're gone. Oh, right. I cracked the door open, peeking out. Are they gone? Yeah. I couldn't hide my disappointment. James chuckled at the look on my face. At least he was smiling, not that cold, sarcastic smile this time. As I walked him to the door, I whispered, don't worry. I won't tell anyone about tonight. His face darkened, and he replied icily, next time, don't go making random wishes. I nodded hastily, then looked at him with hopeful eyes. Can I see you again tomorrow? I'll be at my uncle's house tomorrow, he said. Then I'll go too. He raised an eyebrow, looking at me with mild amusement. But what excuse could I possibly have to show up there? Oh, by the way, James, where did you put the soda bottle? Without another word, James turned and walked off. The next day, I woke up around noon, itching to confirm with James whether everything that happened last night was real. Or could it all have been just a dream? I texted him, but he didn't reply. So cold. I was determined to win him over. That evening, while wandering around the neighborhood with my mom, we ran into James's mom, who was out walking her dog. She and my mom, being good friends, immediately started chatting, and it didn't take long for the conversation to turn to me. My mom chuckled, this girl used to follow James around everywhere. I remember one time when her dad and I had to go out, so we left her at your place. James took care of her the whole time, putting dresses on her, tying her hair in pigtails, even feeding her. Yes, James's mom laughed warmly. When I finally sent Daisy back home, James was so upset he refused to come out for dinner. I teased him, saying if Daisy became his wife when she grew up, she wouldn't have to leave. His face went bright red. They were such close friends back then. I don't know why they drifted apart as they grew up. Listening to this, I was dumbfounded. I had no idea. I absolutely had to ask James about this. Back at home, I sat on the toilet, deep in thought. What exactly happened that night? Was my wish really that powerful? Holding my breath, I clasped my hands together in a silent prayer. Dear God, please make James my boyfriend. Okay. It was a dumb idea, obviously. Nothing happened. Afterward, I opened that photo I'd secretly snapped of James. The longer I looked, the more bittersweet I felt, liking him even more. Then, right as I was admiring his handsome face, James himself appeared in front of me. He spotted me on the toilet, his face darkening with a look that said he was ready to interrogate me. But after 2 seconds, his face flushed red. We locked eyes, both shocked. Ah! I shrieked, pulling down my shirt to cover myself. He frowned. I didn't see anything. Close your eyes, I demanded. He covered his eyes with one hand. Stop screaming. What if your parents hear? Right on cue, my mom knocked on the door. What are you yelling about in there? I lost a game, I blurted out. You're an adult. All you ever do is play games, she muttered as she walked away. I pulled up my pants, flushed, and then met James's eyes with intense embarrassment. Luckily, it had only been a quick trip to the bathroom. Daisy, he said my name in a way that made me feel like he wanted to throttle me. What on earth are you up to? Gripping my phone, I feigned innocence. I have no idea. Yeah. Right. If he found out it was because of that photo, he'd definitely make me delete it. Did you make another wish? James asked, seething. I shook my head, then nodded. I just really wanted to see you. That was the truth. James took a deep breath, as if trying to process this. After all, his logical brain probably couldn't grasp this mystical stuff. How long will your parents be in the living room? He asked. A bit calmer now. They're usually asleep by 10. So, we're going to stay in the bathroom for an hour? James asked. What if they need to use it? I leaned over to start filling up the bathtub. I'll just say I'm taking a bath. James raised an eyebrow. Together? I replied breezily, sure. Looking flustered, he clamped his mouth shut, refusing to engage any further. Oh, by the way, James, I said casually, did you really help me get dressed before? That was when you were 5, and I was 7. So you remember? I said, surprised. My mom told me about it later. Well, you've seen me since I was little, so wouldn't it be fair if I became your girlfriend? I teased. He smirked, yeah, we even used to take naps together. Blushing, I nodded. Right. You wet the bed twice and woke up crying for me to change your clothes. Then you ran to my parents and told them I was the one who'd wet the bed. Oh. Great. No wonder he looked down on me. With a sigh, I said, I'll go hurry my parents to bed so you can sneak out. He looked at me, all right. After coaxing my parents to their room, I gave a couple of discreet coughs, signaling James to come out of the bathroom. He gave me one last long look before slipping out the door. 10 minutes later, once I assumed he'd reached home, I texted him from under my covers. It seems like we're linked somehow. What do you mean? I think whenever I want to see you, you'll just appear. Anytime, any place? Yes. I heard him take a deep breath on the other end, and if he hadn't been so well-mannered, I was pretty sure he would have cursed. Grinding his teeth, he replied, then what should I do? Tell you not to think about me? I typed back, feeling a bit hurt, I can't exactly control it. You know. James let out a mocking laugh. At this rate, it seemed we'd practically be forced to get married in the future. The thought amused me. But soon enough, I realized I'd gotten ahead of myself. James already had a girl he liked. The next day, I eagerly invited James out on a date. There's a movie with great reviews. Want to go see it together? James replied coolly, I don't like movies. Wait, people exist who don't like movies? I put on my sweetest smile. Then you can just look at me. James seemed genuinely shocked at my shamelessness. Oh, come on. In a few days, we'll both be busy with work and won't have much time to meet, I said, trying to sound casual. James smiled faintly. Are you sure? Internally, I was thrilled, he could pop up whenever I wished it. But on the outside, I feigned reluctance. If I don't see you, I'll just miss you. Especially before bed. After meals, and even when I'm taking a bath. On the other end, James was silent, and I could practically feel his exasperation through the phone. What time should we meet? He sounded like he'd finally accepted his fate. This was our first official date since we were kids, so I had to take it seriously. I suspected the reason James hadn't fallen head over heels for me was because he'd only seen me in pajamas. With messy hair and dark circles. Today, he would see a fully made-up, beautiful me. In the afternoon, I put on a coat and tall boots, packed a box of cherries, and strutted to the underground parking garage with youthful confidence. James arrived on time, wearing a red sweater under his jacket that made his skin look especially fair. Definitely a Christmas gift from his mom, I thought with a smirk. You look good in red, James. I complimented him. He shrugged. What's this? He asked, eyeing the box. My mom told me your mom loves cherries. You can take them back home with you, I said, smiling slyly. This way, his mom would know he'd been out on a date with me. My plan was flawless. James looked at me, taking the box from my arms. Pretty strong, aren't you? I immediately put on a pitiful face. Not really. My arms hurt so much. He chuckled softly, placing the box in the trunk. With 10 minutes until the movie started, we killed some time by the claw machines. Suddenly, a cheerful voice called, "James?" We turned to see a pretty girl standing nearby, a guy holding a tub of popcorn by her side. A couple, maybe? I relaxed a little. Are you here to see Sniper too? The girl smiled and looked at me, hesitant. And this is? I wanted to answer, but held my tongue. Daisy. James said. Better to introduce me by name than pass me off as his sister, I supposed. Hi, I'm Megan, she said, then gestured to the guy next to her. This is my friend. We should all watch together. Who wants that? But since James didn't object, I had to go along with it. In some bizarre twist of fate, our seats were right next to each other. As soon as we sat down, Megan turned to her friend and said, "Let's switch seats." Now she was sitting right next to James. So frustrating. If only I'd taken the right seat instead. My head was starting to ache, probably from a mild cold, not to mention my sour mood. I couldn't focus on the movie at all. Somewhere in the haze, I heard Megan leaning toward James, explaining that the guy beside her was just her neighbor from her hometown, not her boyfriend. I didn't know if James believed her. But I sure didn't. Clutching the stuffed bunny James had won for me from the claw machine, I stole a glance at him. He had a faint smile on his face, and my heart sank. Was he that happy to learn she was single? When the movie ended, Megan suggested dinner together. Thankfully, James declined. I really wasn't in the mood. In the car on the way home, I sneezed as the warm and cold air kept messing with my sinuses. You're catching a cold? James asked. I kept my head down and didn't respond. Halfway home, he stopped at a pharmacy, returning with some cold medicine and a box of warm oat milk. Handing them to me, he said, "Take the medicine now, so it doesn't get worse." I was a bit touched. I don't like oat milk, I said quietly. It's the only warm thing the cashier had. So, I drank it without another word. The warmth in my stomach was nice. But the memory of James's smile in the theater weighed heavily on my chest. Shortly after, he got a call, his voice softening as he spoke. Who was that? I asked. Megan. She just got home and was checking to see if we made it back too. I didn't reply, but inside, my emotions were swirling. I wanted so badly to say, "Why don't you just drive her home next time?" But what right did I have? Once home, I pulled the covers over my head and tried to sleep, but maybe because of my mood, my cold seemed to worsen, despite the medicine. Half asleep, I pulled up James's photo. I hesitated, wondering if I should delete it, but couldn't bring myself to. And in that split second, James appeared right there. On my bed. And in nothing but boxers, apparently his preferred sleepwear. While James was still asleep, I quickly pulled the blanket over him. He slowly opened his eyes, and the moment our gazes met, his pupils shrank slightly. This time, he didn't even bother scolding me. We lay there under the same blanket, neither of us daring to move. Surrounded by his unique scent, my cheeks warmed. His brow twitched, and suddenly he grabbed my hand, his breath slightly uneven. Daisy. His tone was fierce. Innocently, I replied. It was an accident. My waist was itchy, and I was just trying to scratch it. He took a deep breath, yanking the blanket over himself and pushing me out of bed. Such a gentleman, really. I went to the closet, pulled out a set of men's sweatpants and a hoodie from the bottom shelf, and handed them to him. Thank goodness I'd been prepared. Why aren't you wearing any clothes? I teased. He smirked. I don't like wearing clothes when I sleep. I thought for a moment and shrugged. Well, you don't have to if you don't want to. He frowned. And what's with this outfit? I got it for you in case something like last time happened again. Very thorough of you, he muttered. With zero shame, I replied, yep. My taste was spot on. As James looked like the perfect male lead in a campus drama once he slipped into the clothes I'd chosen for him. I sniffled a bit, offering him a compliment. You look great. James looked at me closely. Is your cold getting worse? Just a little, I admitted. He pressed his hand to my forehead, frowning. You have a fever. What happened to the medicine I gave you? I forgot to take it last night, I said honestly. To avoid alerting my parents. I went to the kitchen alone to get some hot water. When I returned, James told me to lie down, breaking the capsule and placing it in my hand. Won't it hurt my stomach on an empty stomach? I asked, holding the water cup. Instead of reprimanding me, he turned and walked out of the room. I followed, watching as he rummaged around in the fridge. What if my parents see you? He looked up. Do you have a hot plate? James ended up making me a warm cocoa in my room. The hot drink was soothing, and as I sipped, I felt immensely grateful. James, you're so good to me, I murmured, touched. James simply looked down without replying, but I noticed his ears were a bit red. After finishing, he took the cup back to the kitchen. In the morning, if my parents found it, I could just say I'd been craving something sweet. I climbed back into bed as James opened my laptop. I didn't want him to leave, so I kept quiet. Half an hour later, he brought me another cup of water. Take your medicine. Are you always this considerate with your girlfriend? I asked, testing the waters. I don't have a girlfriend. Hearing this, I felt a flicker of happiness. Then can I be your girlfriend? I waited for him to answer. But nothing came. Disappointing. The bed was getting too warm, so I stuck a foot out for some air. He noticed and immediately tucked it back in. The cold medicine made me drowsy, and soon I drifted off to sleep. I didn't know when James left. On Friday, a friend invited me to an art exhibition in the evening, mentioning that James had planned to go too. But he'd caught a cold and was barely able to speak. Guilt washed over me. He must have caught it from me. Determined, I made a pot of vegetable soup and decided to bring it to him. When I knocked on his door, his mom greeted me with delighted surprise, showering me with compliments on how thoughtful I was. Having a mother-in-law like this in the future would be amazing, I thought. James has been sleeping all day. When he's sick, he gets so picky with food and hasn't eaten anything, she sighed. Would he even drink the soup I'd made? My gaze fell on a pink lunchbox on the dining table with a neatly arranged pasta inside. His classmate dropped by earlier with that, his mom explained with a smile. Of course, it had to be Megan. How did she find out so fast? He just got sick. And she already knew. I felt even worse. His mom knocked on his door. Daisy brought you some vegetable soup. Are you awake? After a moment, James's voice came from inside, sounding weak. His mom opened the door, revealing a room much tidier than mine. The bedspread was a deep navy, and the furnishings were simple. Even their dog wanted to follow us in, but his mom held it back, laughing as she told us to chat and then closed the door. James, in plaid pajamas, was leaning against the headboard, his face pale with a vulnerable look, his eyes a bit watery from congestion. You seem worse off than me, I said. When I left your house, I didn't have my keys or my phone. I waited outside for 3 hours until my mom woke up. How did you even get back in the first place? I knocked on the door, told my mom I'd been at a friend's place. I got home too late. So she warned me she'd lock up at 10 from now on. And she actually did. I felt a wave of guilt, almost ready to cry. I'm so sorry. I'll never mess around and bring you to my place again. James sneered. You think you can resist? I faltered. I'll try. He gave me a look that said, yeah, right. I poured the soup from the container into a bowl, carefully offering it to him. Are you hungry? Want to try some? He turned away in disdain. No. Take it away. It smells really good, I urged. You'll feel worse if you don't eat anything. I made it myself, with shrimp you like. Just try a sip. Honestly, I didn't have high hopes. If he wouldn't eat Megan's pasta, why would he drink my soup? But to my surprise, he took a small sip from the edge of the bowl. I brightened. Is it okay? It's all right, he muttered. I took it as a compliment. He finished the entire bowl. And my heart melted. He was just too cute. Do you want another bowl? He shook his head. It must hurt to have a headache when you're sick. Want me to massage it for you? After some convincing, he finally agreed, though he refused to lay his head on my lap. Oh well. Gradually, as I massaged his head, his expression softened. He really was quite sick, his forehead damp with sweat. Watching him lying there with his eyes closed, I had the sudden urge to kiss him, but in the end, I didn't dare. The day before going back to work after the holidays, I messaged James with a bit of regret. Once I'm back in Brooklyn, I won't dare to just think about you whenever I want. How would you get home otherwise? James replied, I'm in New York too. This was too good to be true. Really? Where do you live? I asked. He sent me his location. And I was shocked to see he was less than 3 kilometers away. Can I get a lift back with you? I can keep you company on the drive. James, all right. So he'd been living this close all along? How many years had we wasted? The day we left home, both families came to see us off. The car's trunk was packed to the brim, and the scene felt oddly like they were sending off a newlywed couple. I shared this thought with James. And his face flushed red. I took that as shyness. Back in Brooklyn, we each threw ourselves into busy routines. James worked in finance, doing mergers and acquisitions at an investment bank. This spring, he'd taken on a new project, and he was swamped. Not wanting to interrupt him, I hadn't looked at his photo for a while. But apparently, he couldn't hold out. One night, I received a restrained message from him. Have you been busy lately? Not at all. I was just trying not to bother you, I replied quickly, so I've been working really hard on suppressing my thoughts of you. James, you managed to suppress them so easily? I sensed a touch of resentment. Haha, are you worried I'll lose interest? James, don't overthink it. Too late. I know you're worried. So that evening, I set up a candlelit dinner, sent him a reminder to dress sharp, and told him not to forget his keys and phone. Just past 8, I gazed at his photo with utmost sincerity. James appeared, looking absolutely dashing in a suit. I had to restrain myself from jumping him or vice versa. He glanced at the blueberry cake on the table, his expression complicated. How did you know today was my birthday? We grew up together. How could I forget? I smiled. I even have a present for you. His voice softened. What is it? I unbuttoned my coat, and James's eyes narrowed, his hand reaching out to stop me. I looked at him, confused. It's just a jacket I bought for you. He relaxed his grip. Catching on, I teased, but if you were hoping for something else, I could take a quick shower first. James took a deep breath. Thanks, but no. I felt a twinge of disappointment. Well, do you like the jacket? I asked. He glanced it over. It's nice. I like it. It's a matching set. I have one too, I grinned, amused by how I could still fluster him. Time flew by, and soon it was midnight. Other than your family, no one else knows it's your birthday, right? We stood on the balcony, each holding a glass of wine. The night air was crisp. James nodded. Did any of your past girlfriends know? I asked. He gave me a look but said nothing. Have you ever had a girlfriend? James turned back toward the room. 24 years old and never had a girlfriend, he's practically a saint. I followed him, chattering away. So, would you like one now? I could join you for meals, play games with you, take care of you when you're sick, even stay over if you wanted. No, too noisy. He replied with a touch of exasperation. A friend of his once mentioned that he didn't date because of a past heartbreak. Who could be so awful as to break his heart, leaving him so guarded? Could it be Megan? She did give off a bit of a heartbreaker vibe. The thought irked me, and my department's social gathering came just in time. But with my bad mood, I kept losing at games and ended up drinking way too much. Until I was completely out of it. In my hazy state, I saw James. He gently brushed my bangs aside, calling my name softly. I fell into his arms, and he didn't push me away. Can you walk? I vaguely heard him ask. I nodded instinctively, then shook my head decisively. At some point, I ended up on his back. His shampoo smelled amazing, and I took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. His ears turned pink. He kept glancing at me while driving. And I reassured him, don't worry, I hardly ever throw up. He knocked my head lightly. If you're not feeling well, why drink so much? That's exactly why I drank. Once we reached my building, he half carried me inside. An older lady in the elevator gave him a disapproving look, which clearly made him uncomfortable. I buried my face in his chest, giggling. But my smile faded quickly. James helped me onto his couch and placed his phone on the coffee table before heading to the kitchen for some water. When his phone screen lit up, I noticed his wallpaper was a cherry blossom tree, with delicate pink petals floating gracefully. Was James really such a romantic? In an instant, I thought of Megan, and my heart sank. After that night, I spent 2 days cooling off. Chasing after someone who didn't return my feelings. Well, if I were in his shoes, I'd be annoyed too. I decided to meet James and end things. Taking a deep breath, I said, I won't think about you anymore, so don't worry. After all the rejections, even I, with all my persistence, was feeling worn out. He gripped his coffee tightly, his jaw clenched in irritation. With a mocking tone, he retorted, oh really? I'd like to see you manage that. In the days that followed, every time I thought of James, I'd pinch myself and try to distract my mind. Fortunately, my company had taken on a new project for a domestic brand. Since the initial pricing negotiations had dragged on too long, the time left for development was minimal. I was so busy trying to meet the tight deadline that I had no energy for daydreaming. The photo of him still sat in my album unseen but not deleted. I had more self-control than I realized. One night after another long day at work, I was exhausted and eager to get home and sleep. As I stepped out of the office, I heard a car honk beside me. I looked over. Surprised to see a familiar tall figure step out, it was James. I couldn't hide my shock as I stared at him, confused. With a slightly annoyed look, he asked, so, you really haven't thought about me at all lately? I was too tired to process, thinking I'd misheard. What did you say? He opened his mouth as if to repeat it, muttered something under his breath. Then opened the passenger door instead. Let me drive you home. That's really not necessary, I said, trying to decline. But James held the door open, giving me an insistent look. It was chilly outside, and the cold cut right to my bones. Besides, I was terrible at saying no to him, so I found myself climbing into the car. Once we were on the road, he repeated his question from earlier, and this time, I understood perfectly. I could even hear a hint of resentment in his voice. Not wanting to let myself get carried away, I turned and looked closely at his face, trying to gauge his reaction. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel, his breathing grew shallow, and his body seemed a little tense. I've just been busy with work, I stammered. After a pause, he added. You even got a haircut 2 days ago. The slight note of disappointment in his tone threw me off. How did he know when I'd changed my hairstyle? Had he really been keeping tabs on me? Why are you still so interested in what I'm up to? I thought you didn't like me, I said, testing the waters. When did I ever say I didn't like you? So, you actually do like me? I teased, half jokingly. To my surprise, he replied with a simple, yes. I froze, feeling my face heat up as the words sunk in. If he liked me, why had he kept rejecting me? What was wrong with him? I was a mix of happy and annoyed, not knowing how to react. You've been so cold toward me for so long, I've already moved on. I don't like you anymore, I said, turning to look out the window. James fell silent, but I felt the air around him grow noticeably tense. Even the car sped up. Scared of pushing him further, I quickly clammed up, not daring to provoke him anymore. As I reached to open the car door, James caught my hand, startling me with his sudden boldness. Every time you say you miss me, I want to kiss you. I want to respond, but I've held back, he said slowly. It wasn't that I was ignoring you on purpose. At first, I was worried you were just playing around. I thought, if it was real, you wouldn't say it so casually. His words caught me off guard. I hesitated, then asked, James, have you been hurt before? He glanced at me with a slight smile. Yeah. When I was a kid, there was this little girl from the neighborhood who clung to me all the time. Every time she got scolded at home, she'd come running over. She used her dolls to hold weddings for us, pulled me along to watch her parents' hidden romance movies, and would ask why people kissed each other. She even used to say she'd marry me one day, that she'd love me forever. But as soon as she grew up, she stopped talking to me and started writing love letters to other people. The more he spoke, the guiltier I felt. Wasn't he describing me? Reading my expression, James smirked. Who else would it be? Good grief. I was the one who'd soured his view on love. He remembered all of this so clearly, it was obvious my indifference had hurt him deeply. I've always liked you, I began, trying to explain. But back then, I saw you as a brother. I was too young to understand, so I didn't think much of my feelings or the way I acted. Later, when I hit my teens, I became hyper-aware of the differences between boys and girls. My heart would race whenever I saw you. And I couldn't look you in the eye or talk to you. And then, with all the acne on my face, I was scared you'd think I was ugly. I bared my heart, hoping to ease his feelings. As for the love letter, that was just me fooling around. I don't even remember who I wrote it to anymore. James listened quietly, his gaze softened by a warmth that made my heart race. When I saw you at New Year's, it hit me that you were my first crush. You were the first person I ever liked, I added shyly. And okay, maybe I was a little bit swayed by your looks. So when you said you wanted to be with me, you meant it? Yes, I meant it. I nodded, nearly swearing an oath. Otherwise, why would my wish come true? Even the universe is rooting for me. For the first time in a long while, James smiled genuinely. Is that so? Yes. Just then, his phone screen lit up, showing a new message. I peeked over and noticed that his wallpaper was still the cherry blossom tree. James, do you like Megan? He looked up at me. Why do you ask? That day at the movies, when she told you she didn't have a boyfriend, you looked pretty happy. She doesn't have a boyfriend? He asked, looking genuinely indifferent. And what does that have to do with me? Right. Then why were you smiling? I was smiling at you, he said. That day, you were wearing a pink coat, hugging a stuffed bunny, stealing glances at me while sighing. I was watching you the whole time. I didn't hear a word she said. Wait, really? I pointed at his phone. But then why the cherry blossom wallpaper? Isn't that proof you secretly like her? Realizing what I meant, James gave me a long look. Then changed his wallpaper to a pink bunny right in front of me. But you still haven't explained why you had cherry blossoms in the first place. You once posted on social media that you wanted to go to Japan to see cherry blossoms with your boyfriend when you turned 22. I vaguely remembered saying that I made so many little plans each year that I could barely keep track myself. Well, I don't find cherry blossoms that appealing anymore, he said thoughtfully. Bunnies are much nicer. It all made sense now, the way I drunkenly glanced at his phone that night, suspiciously checking out his wallpaper. Did I really look sneaky? I asked, embarrassed. That's not what I meant. Seeing my crushed expression, he softened. Daisy, you have big, beautiful eyes, a cute little nose. I like everything about you. I felt a bit better. What about my lips? He chuckled and leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to my lips. Your lips are warm and soft. I stared at him, wide-eyed. Daisy, would you like to be my girlfriend? Finally, the words I'd been waiting for. I considered confessing about the photo, but I decided it could wait until tomorrow. So, as my boyfriend, can you come whenever I call? He smiled. Yes. Will you join me for meals, play games with me, and keep me company at night? Yes. Then, could you carry me upstairs right now? His gaze darkened for a second, and then he whispered, of course.